The best me I've ever been.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, another team preview podcast. Today we are looking at the Chicago Bulls. Lots to talk about with them. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. To talk about the Bulls, I am joined by one of the hosts of the Locked On Bulls podcast. Matt Peck is back to talk Chicago Bulls basketball. Matt, good to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Hopefully the 1920 season's a little kinder to us. I know I went a little over on my win projections the last time we talked.
I think it will be a little bit better for the Bulls this season as opposed to where it was last year. They do have the makings of at least a team that maybe can compete for that 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. It's still not going to be an excellent team by any means, but I think we're seeing some of these young players move along and some really solid, underrated veterans added to the squad throughout free agency. So let's start with this. Injuries. That's what I was trying to get out. On all these previous shows, I like to start just with an update on players who were injured last season. Let's start with Wendell Carter Jr., who had an additional surgery in the offseason on a core muscle injury. We expecting him to be ready to go fully by training camp?
That's the latest we've heard. The expectation is Wendell will be ready for the beginning of training camp. Still a big hit for the Bulls because we were hoping for a fully healthy offseason for Wendell to not only work on his game but also build his body up a little bit because we did see him get taken advantage of at times with all of his defensive strengths when he was trying to guard some of the more dominant bigs in the league his rookie season. The thumb that ended his rookie season is fine, but as you mentioned, that core injury that required some attention this offseason really put a damper on some of the excitement that Bulls fans were starting to feel about Wendell and him and Lauri sharing that Bulls front court together. But what we've heard, he will be ready to go for training camp at the beginning of the season.
Last season, he was the 113th ranked fantasy player and only 25 minutes a game. Now, he absolutely projects to be getting more playing time than that this season, Matt, and I also expect him to be shooting more than 19% from three.
You would think so, because people were really excited about the numbers he displayed his one season at Duke at the collegiate level, shooting above 40%. Granted, it was on a smaller sample size of just over 40 total attempts on the season, but it wasn't really a part of his game, whether it was Fred Hoiberg or Jim Boylen or the timidity of Wendell himself to not take those open looks when he saw them. We did see him shoot from the corners and from the sides like a little bit. Every once in a while, he was given those opportunities. He would take a shot and knock it down. But the hope is, even with the offseason injury, he's put some time in. And with all of the shooters that they now have built around Zach LaVine as the primary scorer for this offense, you hope that you see Wendell take advantage of some more of those opportunities.
Yeah, something I did want to ask you is it did appear that when Boylen took over, it did change Carter's game. It seemed to reduce his confidence a little bit and his role seemed to change. Did you see that as something that was happening? And how do we look at Carter and Boylen's relationship heading into this season in terms of how he'll be utilized on the court?
I absolutely did notice it, and even times not only talking about Wendell being hesitant to shoot from behind the three-point line, but when he was in pick-and-roll situations or when he found himself with the ball inside the three-point line, there were times where he was just not even looking at the basket, not even looking to score when the defense was sagging off of him. So I don't know if that was the communication that was being given to him from Jim Boylen. What I do feel good about as far as not only the offseason additions they made to the roster, but the coaching staff. We have concerns about Jim Boylen here in Chicago, but they added Lloyd, who was given a lot of credit to the development of Clint Capella, one of the best young up-and-coming bigs in this league as he developed over there down in Houston. So adding Roy Rogers to this staff and hoping that Rogers is the one primarily working with Wendell, we're optimistic that Wendell can have a big jump here in his second season.
I think he will too. He's ranked at 77 on Yahoo, which is about right. I think he can be maybe a top 70 guy. ESPN, he's at 50, which seems a little bit aggressive, but there's no reason he can't get to that. I've said on this podcast many times, I think in the coming 3 to 4 years, he'll be a top 25 player. He's got that ability to contribute right across the board in every single category and be efficient from both the field and from the free throw line, and all those things are great. And the fact that he was a top 120 guy as a rookie in only 25 minutes a game should show you the absolute ability that he's got, that once that ramps up and once a lot of these other factors get fixed, which they won't necessarily be guaranteed to be fixed, but they're on the right track, we'll see a real dynamic fantasy player. Now, the other guy who missed all of last season, the hammer, Denzel Valentine. Look, it's going to be hard for him, I think, to find that same role that he had in the 17-18 season because of the additions that this team's made. Where is Valentine looking to be sitting in this rotation? Is he healthy for a start after missing all of last season with an ankle injury? And where does he fit on this current iteration of the Bulls?
I mean, I'm already out on Denzel. I don't expect a whole lot from him just because, as you said, he did not play at all last season. He's a guy who came in as a rookie in the 2016 draft with a litany of injuries on his resume already, being a 4-year player at Michigan State. And the fact that he was already as old as he was entering the league, he's coming into this season at age 25 already, having it only been his third season. So I don't have a lot of expectations about Denzel. As far as the rotation, the question is, he might actually find himself in it because there's just so little there behind Otto Porter Jr. at the wing spot. I think Otto's going to play a lot of minutes this season because behind Otto, essentially the Bulls' options are either Denzel Valentine, who you hope is healthy, and when he is healthy has proved that he can at least be a knockdown three-point shooter, or the Bulls' additional draft pick from this past year, Chandler Hutchison, who really, I mean, he dealt with his own injury last season that ended his season short of finishing it, and he, unlike Denzel, just cannot shoot at all. We've heard that he's been working on his shot in the offseason, but to me, his form is still all kinds of wacky. His release is really slow. He's got a lot of other skills like rebounding, pushing the ball in transition. He's a solid passer. He's got great length at that wing spot, but he's really not much of a threat to shoot the ball at all. So those are the two guys that are going to be competing behind Otto Porter for minutes.
Yeah, I think it probably will go to Valentine just because of the shooting. Hutchison also looked really, really poor in Summer League this past July. In Vegas, did not look like he would had taken that necessary step. And like Valentine, a little bit of an older player, 23 years of age here, heading into his second season. But yeah, I agree that Valentine, we're not going to get a huge amount out of him. Let's talk. Let's go to the pointy end of the roster more now. Let's talk about Zach LaVine, who really was strong for this team last season. Obviously, leading the team, being their number one scorer. Things are a little bit different this season, just in terms of adding other players and other guys potentially stepping up. Do we see LaVine still as that no doubt number one option, or is there a chance that someone like Lauri Markkanen can grab a hold of that?
I mean, I think it's possible that Markkanen kind of takes that mantle from LaVine, but I wouldn't say it's likely. I mean, when you look at their usage percentages last season, LaVine's was at 30.5, whereas Lauri was not even really close to that. He was all the way down at 25.1. So that was a big jump for Lauri compared to his rookie season when his usage percentage was not even 22%. But to me, the big question is whether or not, between the coaching decisions and who they want to make the primary focus of this offense, and also the aggressiveness of Lauri Markkanen, who at times last season showed us potential to be a dominant, like 20-10 kind of player in this league. But also some nights you look in the box score and you see that he didn't even take 10 shots. And I think some of it is system and some of it is Markkanen adding that extra level of aggression and demanding the ball. But I would be surprised if Markkanen overtakes LaVine as that primary scorer on this Bulls team last year, because even though Markkanen averages 18-9 his second season, which is impressive in and of itself, LaVine averaged 23-4-4, and he didn't get a lot of credit for it. He didn't get a lot of recognition, borderline all-star numbers, but on a team that only won 22 games. I still think that LaVine is that guy who's going to be leading this team in scoring every night.
I think so too. I agree that he'll be around that 23-24 mark again this season, and that means he's like a top 40, top 45 fantasy player, which is about the spot that he's been ranked on both Yahoo and ESPN and Fantrax at 50, 47, and 49. So there's probably a little bit of value in drafting him there. He did finish as a top 40 guy last season. Again, he has some issues in terms of generating defensive stats, and his on-court defense is a struggle, but those other numbers that he does put up are obviously really beneficial, especially the fact that he gets the line as often as he does, and he hits those free throws at such a high rate. So he is a strong option there. The other guy that you mentioned, of course, is Lauri Markkanen, the apple of any online Bulls person's eyes. We see plenty of Lauri Markkanen memes and chunky boy posts and all this sort of stuff about Lauri putting on this extra weight. He had this red-hot stretch last season in February, I believe, and then had that 18 overtime game against the Hawks and was never the same since, and then had to end the season due to fatigue/heart rhythm issues. That stretch of play is encouraging. He had it was about 10 games in a row of 20-plus points and double-doubles in that time frame. Really massive numbers for Markkanen, but being able to do that consistently, and as you said, being aggressive offensively consistently has been a problem for Markkanen. Do you think that that turning point of that large overtime game was what took him out of that streak, or was that something that he was just going to have, that this is a hot streak and it's going to cool off, or was there a switch flipped, I guess, during that little stretch in February?
I mean, I do think that there is something to Markkanen being one of those young players who has taken time to adjust to the grueling 82-game NBA schedule. And he has not played a close to 82-game season in his first 2 years in the league. He played 68 his rookie year and then just 52 last year. Again, part of that was just because he suffered an elbow injury at the beginning of training camp and missed the first 15 to 20 games of the season. But I do think that there is a little bit of concern about Markkanen and his ability to be a player who withstands the necessary endurance of that full calendar year. You highlighted that portion of his season in February where he was an absolute monster. He averaged 26 and 12 in that month. And that is the kind of player that Bulls fans are all, as you said on Bulls Twitter, hoping that he can be. Because I think as much as people believe that this is Zach LaVine's team right now and LaVine will be leading this team in scoring every night, the hope is that Markkanen has a higher ceiling than Zach LaVine does. It's just a question of whether or not he reaches it. Another big part of, I think, what made Markkanen so effective in that month of February is when Otto Porter Jr. arrived via trade. And Otto, just because he is a smart, savvy veteran player, helped so many things that were getting clogged and stuck in that Bulls offense. I think Otto and also the arrival of the free agent addition Thomas Satoransky are going to help Markkanen a lot this season. I don't know if he's going to be able to stretch that February performance over an entire 82-game season, but I think you're going to see improved stats from Markkanen in year 3.
I think he is going to average 20 points a game this season. He averaged 18.7 last year, close to 10 rebounds. The thing that's always going to hold him back from being an elite fantasy guy is the lack of defensive numbers. He doesn't really block any shots. He doesn't generate steals. He's not very high on the assist numbers. So all those things are a concern. Plus his overall field goal percentage is not in that level that you'd want for most big men. Shooting, 44% last, 43% from the field, and only 41% from the field over the final 19 games. So that did dip off there. So that's a bit of a concern in terms of his overall value. But the points, the rebounds, the threes, the free throw percentage, that's all really solid from Markkanen. And he's, again, ranked at about the right spot on most places. ESPN at 28 is probably too high. Fantrax at 63 is probably too low. He's in that, say, 40 to 50 range, fourth or fifth round type of a range in terms of a prospect. But he does absolutely, heading into the third year, have an ability to really step things up. But the thing that, again, I think holds him back is the lack of defensive numbers that we've yet to see him be able to produce throughout his time here in the NBA so far. Let's talk about Otto Porter. We've referenced him a couple of times already. When he came across in that trade from Washington, he put up some really big numbers. Now, at the start of the season in Washington, he struggled. Scott Brooks used him weirdly, limited his minutes, had his usage really low, and as a result, or I believe as a result, this is speculation, the fact that he was being jerked around so much, it impacted his stellar shooting. And when he arrived in Chicago, he had a role, he was playing good minutes, and that shooting went back up to that legendary sort of number, 40%. In fact, over his final 13 games, he shot 47% from 3. 41% over the course of the season. He'd been at 44 and 43 each of the last 2 years, and really took that step back up once he joined the Bulls. His 2-point percentage did drop off quite a bit, but we saw him put together usage numbers which he'd never done before. Do we see him in that larger usage role again this season? Because his last couple of years in Washington, 18 and 15 in usage. In Chicago, 21. It's a big difference, and is that how he's going to be used this year?
Right. It was a big jump, and it went, it coincided with jumps in basically all of his per game stats across the board when he arrived in Chicago from Washington. 17.5 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.2 steals. And you mentioned the percentages, overall field goal percentage and 3-point percentage just skyrocketed when he arrived. As far as the usage percentage, I'm a little skeptical to say that it will remain as high as it was in his short stint in Chicago, just because it was such a small sample size when he arrived. He only played 15 games with the Bulls before getting shut down for the season. And, him and Markin, and I think a lot of that was also about they had one eye on the draft lottery at that time. Those injuries were not necessarily that serious. But I think, his usage percentage will probably stay where it is. I wouldn't expect a big jump, but everything that the Bulls are going to do is going to require Otto Porter to be on the court, just because I think he is going to end up, if healthy, leading this team in minutes. His usage percentage probably won't drop. I wouldn't expect it to go much higher than it was last season in that small 15-game sample size, but just sheer minutes alone, his usage percentage is going to stay where it was.
Yeah, I think it's about that 20 mark again this season. I think he probably has a chance and probably will be the best ranked fantasy player from a Bulls perspective because of his efficiency, because of his high steal rate. He rebounds the ball pretty well as well. He's ranked on ESPN at 82, which makes no sense. In the last 5 years, he has never had a season ranked at 82 or worse. So he was obviously a steal if you're getting him there. And actually, the ADP on ESPN's at 98. So people are sleeping even more than the people making the ranks over there. Yahoo at 31. A little aggressive, but that's about the right range, 3rd or 4th round for Porter, and 75 on Fantrax is way too low. He's going to score solid high teens, hit threes, rebound, get steals, and be efficient. It's fantastic, especially for a roto format. Otto Porter, I think, is a guy that's getting slept on in some situations, especially after he was able to use that bigger or that increase in usage in Chicago and use it to a good advantage. I want to talk point guards now with you, Matt, because the Bulls have an interesting point guard situation. Last season, Kris Dunn was their starter. I don't see how that's going to be the case this year.
No, I would not expect it. I would be shocked, in fact, if Kris Dunn were the starter. And it's not necessarily a knock on Dunn. He certainly has his offensive limitations. He's never been a very confident or effective three-point shooter. We did see him up his attempts and his percentage a little bit last season, but nothing earth-shattering. And to me, as far as this Bulls rebuild and what they're trying to accomplish, it's been clear, even in the smaller sample size between a season and a half collectively, that he just has no chemistry whatsoever with Zach LaVine, and that backcourt doesn't work. And Zach LaVine, certainly at least on the offensive end, is the more efficient player, so they're going to run with LaVine, and that is why they went out and paid Thomas Satoransky this offseason. To me, as much as some Bulls fans are trying to get really excited about Kobe White, who they took 7th overall in the 2019 draft, they signed Satoransky in the offseason to be this team's starter.
Agree.
They want to trade Kris Dunn, and Kris Dunn wants to be traded. But unfortunately, right now, leading up into training camp, the market for Kris Dunn is just non-existent. I would expect that they try to trade him before that deadline in February of 2020. Until then, they might use him as a defense first player off the bench, Boylan's rotation. But my guess, and again, just an educated guess, Satoransky will win the starting point guard job out of training camp.
I'm pretty sure that Satoransky will be that starting point guard. I think that there's probably more of a chance that Dunn is out of the rotation on opening night entirely, rather than him being a starter. Depends what they want to do with Kobe White, but even if Dunn is in the rotation initially and he's not traded, I think that White will take that backup job from him pretty quickly. Let's talk Satoransky, because he's going to be the guy who's going to be getting the bulk of these minutes. He's filled in admirably for John Wall over the past couple of seasons. He's played at the 2 and the 3. He's a solid shooter. He's a smart decision maker. He plays strong defense. And I think he's going to come in and probably be a little bit underrated in terms of fantasy. Both Yahoo or all Fantrax, Yahoo and ESPN have him ranked outside the top 120. I think he can push the top 100. In fact, he's had top 60 runs when he's been replacing John Wall as a point guard. He probably won't get quite to that level, but I love what he can do a low usage guy who can distribute, who can play defense, and who can score efficiently. And last season, his shooting did drop off a little bit, but it wasn't extreme. And I think he can get back to that level. I really love how he's going to fit with these other guys.
Yeah, when you look at what he did in the 54 games for Washington as a starter to finish out last season, in those 54 games as a starter, his usage percentage was a measly 14.2, yet he still shot 48.6 overall from the field, 40.4 from behind the three-point line, averaging 10.7 points, 4.3 rebounds, and 6.2 assists per game. As a low usage starting point guard, those are respectable numbers, even as, even for the sake of fantasy basketball. And really, it's as far as what Bulls fans are excited about and the lack of, being penalized. It's not just the 6.2 assists per game in those 54 games as a starter. It is his assist to turnover ratio. Yep. With whether it was Kris Dunn, whether it was Zach LaVine being asked to handle the ball a lot more than he was used to, we saw a lot of high turnover games for this sloppy, bad young Bulls team last year. That was a big attraction, I think, for the Bulls, looking at Satoransky to say, here's a guy who's going to take care of the basketball, but let LaVine and Lauri and Otto be the focuses of this offense.
They drafted Kobe White at pick number 7, who had some flashes in Summer League, also shot absolutely horribly, and it didn't look like he was ready to be an NBA starter, so that's not going to be the case for him. Do you think he will be that backup point guard straight away?
I think the Bulls are going to bring Kobe along slowly. He's young. They know he is a project. I wouldn't even call him a work in progress. He is a project. He's very raw. They love, obviously, his speed, his ability to, attack downhill, which we did see a lot of at UNC. And we also did see that he could beat guys off the dribble at times. He can attack the basket, and he can step back and shoot. So, he has a lot of skills to his game, but I don't think any of them are ready to really be thrown in. Not only, let alone, he's not going to start, but even asking him to play 20 to 25 minutes a game off the bench, I think even that is optimistic. So, again, it all comes down to what they want to do with Kris Dunn, if they just shelve him or if they try to play him to up his trade value, leading to that trade deadline midseason. And then the other factor is that for being one of Jim Boylan's favorite people in the world, for being a guy who played a lot of last season when everybody else was suffering through various injuries, and similar to Satoransky, just being a smart, efficient guard who's going to take care of the basketball, they did also bring back Ryan Arcidiacono on a 3-year, $9 million deal. So there's a lot of guards fighting for those backup minutes.
Yeah, that is interesting. There's five point guards on this roster. White, Dunn, Satoransky.
Shaq Harrison, too.
Big Shaq Harrison's there as well, Look, when they waived him, I was a bit annoyed during Summer League. They brought him back. Obviously, there was a roster machinations thing. I think that he could fill in what Kris Dunn does at obviously a significantly cheaper price, and I think that he can fill that role. He's going to find it hard to get the minutes this year, Big Shaq, but it will be. He's an interesting player that when he's out there, he's going to generate steals. And anyone who plays fantasy basketball knows that if Shaq Harrison's pushed into a large enough role, you are going to get steal numbers from him. That's just what he does. The other free agency acquisition for this team was Thad Young, who comes across from being a starter in Indiana the last couple of seasons. Stops in Minnesota, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, all that before that. But he moves into a significantly different role this season as the backup behind Lauri Markkanen. And I imagine that the Bulls will go with a lot of young Markkanen front courts as well. But it's hard to see Thad playing those 30, 31 minutes a night again this season.
Yeah, and it's going to be an adjustment for him. He started 81 games each of the past 2 seasons, 74 games, 73 games the seasons before that, all starts. So he knows he's coming in to play a backup role in this Bulls roster, and a lot of what they brought him in for was to be a veteran who has played on various playoff teams, has been around and been a quality role player in a lot of different places throughout the league, and also to do some of the dirty work that, as you highlighted, Lauri Markkanen doesn't essentially excel at. Be a mentor for Wendell, teach both him and Lauri a thing or two on the defensive end, get some buckets in the paint, because as we know, as much as Bulls fans are excited about the addition of Chris Fleming to the coaching staff and all of the things that Brooklyn did to improve their three-point shooting with Fleming over the past couple of years, Jim Boylan was feeding Rolo in the post like crazy last season. So there's going to be a give and take there. They know that Wendell and Lauri both struggled to score on the block last season. Thad Young is a bang-down down low kind of vet who can get you points in the paint. He's going to do that. He's going to set good hard screens. He's going to rebound the ball. He's going to play defense. All of those things, plus the veteran leadership, is why he was brought to Chicago.
So he is being ranked aggressively high on ESPN at number 83, which is basically the same spot that he finished last season. He is not going to be able to achieve that, so do not think about drafting him. He is not a standard league draftable player, in my opinion. His Fantrax ADP is too high at 99 as well. Yahoo's got him at 132. That's probably about the right spot for Thad to be in terms of ranking, but the upside there is only, it's limited unless there's an injury to either, or mainly Markin, but also to Wendell Carter as well. I want to talk to you now, Matt, about the last rotation spot, or how I see the last rotation spot, and that's going to be whoever that nominal backup center is. Could it be Luke Cornett, who they brought across? Could it be rookie Daniel Gafford? Could it be Cristiano Felicio? It's not Cristiano Felicio. Is it Cornett or is it Gafford that will fill in that 10th spot in the rotation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as far as what we know and what we don't know about this Bulls rotation coming into the season, that one is the biggest toss-up to me, because people really like what they saw from Gafford in Summer League. He got a lot of people excited as a guy who rolls to the rim, a great lob target, and also is just, as he proved at, his collegiate level at Arkansas, just a blocking machine. But then you look at Luke Cornett, who is also, for a guy not necessarily you wouldn't think it to look at him, he has a pretty high block rate in his days with the Knicks over the past couple of seasons, and he's a 7-footer like Lauri that can step back behind that 3-point line and just drill threes. There were a couple of games, not back to back, but within a week or so of each other, where the Bulls and Knicks, two tanking teams, played each other at the end of last season, and Luke Cornett lit us up from behind the 3-point line. So I'm sure that certainly was a weighing contributing factor when the Bulls gave Luke Cornett a call this summer. It's all about what they need. Are they looking for a more traditional big man like Gafford, who cannot shoot at all? I don't even know if he can sink a 15-foot jump shot, but he can roll. He could be a pick and roll center. Or do they want Luke Cornett, another guy to stretch the floor? And it might depend on a night-to-night matchup basis which one of those guys they favor to get minutes at the backup center spot. I guarantee you this, Lo. As long as Gafford and Cornett are healthy, along with the other front court pieces, Felicio ain't seeing the floor ever again.
Yeah, no, he's not. But I agree with you. I think it is going to be Cornett and Gafford sort of interchanging depending on what they need. Gafford showed quite a bit in Summer League, and he's an interesting longer-term Dynasty League guy. Of course, the guys in front of him are very young in Chicago, Markin and Carter. But as we've seen across the NBA over the last 2 to 3 years, so much movement takes place. Guys can move at any point. It's all about, when you're looking at Dynasty stash guys, banking on talent and seeing if that forces its way into an optimal situation. And I think Gafford can be that guy who can be an influential player with his blocks, with his efficiency, with rebounding. And then if he adds some level of ability to shoot, which is probably doubtful at this point, there is some upside there in him. So just don't look at it and go, well, Carter's in front of him, he's barely going to play. In 3 years' time, that could be a completely different story. Who knows which direction either of those guys' careers goes, or trades, or whatever other stuff can happen. There's a lot that does change up there. I reckon that'll do it here, unless you have any red hot takes on Adam Makoko, the two-way guard for the Bulls.
I mean, hey, if my hot take there is, God forbid the Bulls have to call him up at any point. This was essentially for all of April and the better part of March, a G League basketball team that we were forced to watch last season. I know a lot of Bulls fans are optimistic about the team making a huge leap, maybe sneaking into the 7th or 8th spot in the East. I don't see it. I still think that this team, even if they take a significant jump and say go from 22 wins to 35 wins, which I think is possible, is still going to leave them short of the playoffs. But what I think I'm hoping for, and I think a lot of reasonable Bulls fans are hoping for, is for them to just be sniffing the playoff hunt in the Eastern Conference when they are still playing games at the tail end of March and into April. But I mean, if they're calling up two-way guys or G League guys at that point in time, something went terribly wrong again.
Shout out to Antonio Blakeney. Just to wrap this up, I think the best value pick on this team is probably Thomas Satoransky. Yahoo got him at 129. There's a lot of value there, whereas I think that the bust here is Kris Dunn. ESPN got him at 101. You don't want to be drafting Kris Dunn in any sort of standard leagues. Matt, thank you for...
Don't tell people that, Josh. We got to trade him.
Oh, sorry. No, Kris Dunn's excellent. Everyone, every NBA GM listening to this, please go take Kris Dunn off the Bulls' hands. You're getting an absolute steal if you do that. He's fantastic. Matt, thank you for jumping on again, the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bulls preview. Where can everyone find you on the old socials?
You can find me on Twitter at Bulls_Peck. My Locked On Bulls co-host Jordan Malley, who does amazing work for us, is at Jordan C. Malley, and we are at Locked On Bulls on Twitter, at Locked On Bulls on Instagram, at Locked On Shy Bulls on Facebook.
Go and check out all of those over there. Matt, thanks again for jumping on.
Of course, Josh. Thanks for having me.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast. Make sure you're subscribing Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating and review. And on YouTube, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and subscribe by hitting that button down below, down there somewhere. Yeah, just down there. Just hit that red subscribe button. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Chandler Hutchison.